Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Northwest Fishing Club podcast. Tonight, Todd and I have a special guest, Scott Amerman, with us. Scott has been a fishing guide in Oregon pretty much since his teens. He's also the owner of Amerman Eggs. So thank you for joining us tonight, Scott. Why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself for those who aren't actually familiar with you?
Yeah, I was lucky, grew up with a dad that was one of the best, salmon steelhead fishing guides in the Northwest. Started guiding when I was a teenager, mostly, just as a way to make a little pocket change while I was going to college, doing that kind of stuff. Taking a few of his overflow trips, eventually kind of getting a couple multi-boat trips and that kind of thing with him. I think I got my guide's license for the first time when I was 19 years old. And, for the first 10 years of guiding, I was Gary Amerman's son. And then, eventually I kind of started building my own name, doing that kind of stuff. And, last week I had a group that fished with me for the first time in '89. I had a group that came out and fished with me the first time in 1990, and another group that started out with me in 1993. 3 groups last week that have been out here fishing with me for, 30-ish years, that kind of stuff. And just been kind of guiding and doing that kind of stuff for quite a while. Maybe 20 years ago, just searching for more eggs for my own guiding business. I started buying a lot of eggs and, kind of filtering them into my guide business, doing that kind of stuff. And every now and then I'd get some overflow, so I'd sell them off to guide friends and different friends that I'd cure eggs and sell stuff, and decided I should, get all the licensing, do all that stuff I had to get licensing to purchase them. So then I just went ahead and started buying eggs throughout the state, having contracts with the, Department of Fish and Wildlife for all their surplus salmon eggs at the hatcheries, that kind of stuff. And been running a guide business and then a salmon egg business for the last 20 years, selling bait kind of across the U.S. and just kind of what I do. So then after guiding, doing all that stuff for a long time, I kind of said, how can I leave this fishery better than what I got into it? A lot of things are super frustrating that you see in our industry. So I kind of decided to start, trying to do a lot of stuff throughout our, industry. We've seen how, when we started fishing the Siletz River, it had super, really cool broodstock program fish that came in throughout the years. So we, went and talked to people in Tillamook and tried to get those same broodstock programs done to Wilson. And then we did them on the Nestucca. And then after doing that, we got them going on the Halsey and a few other rivers, and just kind of mimicked what we saw was working in areas and trying to change things that we didn't, that, weren't working in areas and that kind of thing. So that's kind of my history. So I don't know.
That's awesome. Oh, I was going to say, with the egg business, how's that going anymore? I'm guessing you got a lot of competition from like caviar suppliers and things like that. Have they been affecting that part of your business?
Yeah, so what I do is I buy all local Oregon eggs here. So anything I can buy locally in Oregon that comes out fresh, that kind of stuff. I don't bring a lot of eggs out of Alaska. I don't bring anything in that's been frozen. I don't do anything like that. So I got a Northwest product. The caviar market comes in and they want to eat them. And, the Japanese are selling those eggs for $100 a pound when they get back to Japan. So it becomes a pretty heavy competitive market and that kind of stuff. So I kind of buy what I get every year. Some years we get, the big years we've done, 10 to 20,000 pounds of eggs. And in a small year, we might do 1 to 2,000 pounds of eggs. And so some years we sell out of all of our product midway through the season. And some years we have enough to make it all the way through the next year, that kind of thing. So I pride myself in having, the highest quality Northwest product and do that kind of stuff. So something I'd be confident fishing myself.
So what's the process? As a guide, and I don't do a bunch of the salmon stuff anymore, just because of other fisheries that I capitalize on, Scott. But what's does it just get online and order them and then you ship them when you have them, or how does that work exactly?
So we have an online store, amermaneggs.com.
Okay.
We have it open year round. If we have product, it's on the store. We try to every year keep it in stock all the time. We have a line of salmon cure and steelhead cure. We have a cure specifically designed for steelhead fishermen. We have a salmon formula that goes out to all the salmon fishermen, that kind of thing. That's available year round and all the different, stuff. And then we have our cured eggs. We only sell cured eggs that we, I do sell some fresh eggs to guide friends of mine, that kind of stuff from time to time. But for the most part, we sell our cured eggs. Person places an order. We have a courier here in Oregon and Washington. We have a local courier that does like next day courier systems that does all of our eggs, Next Day Express. And they're nice enough to courier all our packages around, leave them on your doorstep, in short order. And then anything we ship to real remote areas or areas that are outside of Oregon, Washington, we tend to ship through the post office. We just, put them in the post office, second day air and that kind of thing, and kind of get them out to people as quick as we can and that kind of thing. And we sell a lot of bait in the, Great Lakes area and that kind of stuff. Seems like always surprised when they start ordering stuff, but so we just do that. And we have a salmon cured line and a steelhead cured line and kind of do that.
Oh, so you sell cured steelhead eggs as well, or salmon eggs for steelhead?
Yeah. So you can't sell steelhead stuff in Oregon. It's real restricted.
Right.
It's a game fish that we can sell salmon eggs if we buy them from, hatchery or some kind of for a fish processor, that kind of thing, with bait dealer's license and whatnot. You can sell salmon eggs, but you can't sell steelhead cured eggs. So we cure, when we get smaller, tighter skeins, like our upriver bright eggs or our spring chinook eggs, we usually cure those smaller, tighter skeins and similar in size to what a steelhead egg would be, but a little bit more rubbery. So you get a little bit more elastic, better casting, that kind of stuff. Where if I sold somebody a large buried, fall chinook skein, then they're going to go out there and cast it, and they're going to go like, why can't I get 25 cast out of my bait? So I try to make something that's more user friendly for each fishery they do. So if I'm selling salmon eggs, I want that egg to milk out a little faster. I want it to, get that kind of thing, where I want, steelhead cured egg to be a little bit more rubbery and a little bit more cast repetitive.
Well, and I think you touched on a great topic, that a lot of people can learn from when they're fishing bait. You see guys, they'll cast the skein. There ain't a berry left in it, and they're still fishing it. And I throw away a lot of bait that is what people will look at and like, oh no, it looks good. No, it doesn't. The second it starts to look subpar, I rip it off and put a new bait on. And I think that's a topic where a lot of people could up their success by having there's something about a fresh bait.
100% agree.
Yeah, and so costs a lot more money, but it's more bait, but more bait equals more fish.
Yeah, catch more fish, get you more bait back. A lot of times this time of year is when you're getting bait and doing that kind of stuff. So, that's why I started an egg business, is because I wanted to have high quality bait in my boat every day. I wanted bait for my clients so I could change my baits and do that stuff, but I didn't want to feel the pressure to kill hens and female fish and that kind of stuff. So, I probably take about 500 pounds of eggs a year from my egg business and put it into my guiding business.
Right.
So, for me, it's a way to continue to do that, but have good quality bait every day and not feel the, desire or the need. I grew up, 30, 40 years ago fishing out here where, everybody kept every hen. A lot of guys hen hunted and did that kind of stuff. And I kind of said, man, I don't like that practice. I don't like having to kill a female fish just because it's a female and that kind of stuff. So, I try to do the same thing by selling a quality product that people can buy out here. They're not relying upon having to go out and kill a bunch of hens that maybe aren't going to be good table fare or do that kind of stuff. So that's just one of the things I kind of, that's why I started the business and did that kind of stuff, just so I could have more bait and do that kind of stuff and not have that pressure of like, I'm going to let this hen go because it's maybe not going to be as good a quality as the next buck we might catch, for that kind of thing. So I don't know, but having good bait definitely leads to catching more fish and doing that kind of stuff, no doubt.
Absolutely. But, it's we've all felt that pressure, I'm running low on eggs, and it's I don't want to say a subpar hen, but you're right on the bubble of, if I had eggs, I'd throw her back, but yeah. Dude, I'm running short on bait. So she's getting the bunker. You seen that at the Klamath River. When I first got to Southern Oregon, we're like, you should have fished the Klamath, 5 years ago. It was an egg hunt. You get 40 fish a day, people don't even charge their clients. They're just down there whacking, 8, 9 hands a day or whatever it was, and now look at that fishing. I mean, that definitely is, it hurts the resource for sure.
Sure.
So your eggs that you sell, do you sell wet and dry eggs, or is it all wet brine?
So I sell a wet brine egg for both my salmon and steelhead cured egg. And I usually sell them pretty wet and let people, if somebody wants to dry out their eggs a little bit for steelhead fishing, they can throw them in the refrigerator. Refrigerators have dehumidifiers. It'll suck the moisture out of the egg without drying the egg out, or it's not like rolling it in borax or putting it on newspaper where you're going to lose some of that scent. By putting it on a cookie sheet, putting it in the refrigerator, you get a little bit of the dehumidifier will suck the moisture out. So it'll be more tacky, kind of, you can, that way when it hits the water, it milks out real slow, that kind of thing. And so I sell the bait, so it stores well. So it is that kind of stuff. I can't sell the egg that tacky and that drier that wouldn't survive for very long, right. But I can sell it wet and then just give people directions as to how to make their bait what they want it to be.
Got it. So are you after you cure them, are you freezing them, or are you just putting them in the refrigerator?
So I freeze mine. When I cure eggs, we might do 500 pounds in an evening.
Right.
And so we're doing pretty much, pretty hardcore commercial. We're curing, 20 to 40 pound batches of them into large contractor bags, and then we take those out after they've cured for 36 to 48 hours. We'll take them out, put them in jars, get them, all ready to sell, and then freeze that product. And so we freeze all of ours within the first 2 days of getting the fresh egg and curing it, doing that stuff. And then we ship it out frozen, and then usually it arrives to the people thawed, and they can take it out and be ready to fish with it. If people really want to get a frozen one, a lot of people will come by and grab frozen jars here or that kind of thing. But
right.
Some of our stores will have them frozen as well, just so that they're, there when they want them, they can pull them out, put more in the refrigerator. But
yep. Awesome.
Now, Scott, you're talking about kind of now in this part of your career that you're giving back to the resource and everything. I've seen that you're part of like the Siletz Anglers Association, right? Is that
sure.
one? And then are there other ones that you're involved with as well?
So I've been a CCA person for a long time. I was actually a CCA member before CCA came to Oregon.
Really?
I had friends that were big. One of my really good friends, Jay Ellis, is a bass fishing Hall of Fame legend. And so he was a member of that in Texas. And, he talked about what they did for the redfish fisheries down there and some of their commercial stuff that they got shut down and some of the way they really rebounded a lot of their fisheries. And I'm like, well, hey, I'll sign up and join. And then they came to the Northwest. And so, they kind of got a hold of me and said, hey, we see you're on this list of people that's in the CCA. And so I've been a member of the CCA since it first got here to the Northwest. I just feel like if we're ever going to do something big, against the Pacific Salmon Treaty or the, Alaska commercial fisheries and those kind of things, we're going to need a multi-state, group that's going to lead that charge and that kind of stuff. And we can talk more about that later. I talked about some of the broodstock stuff we did in Tillamook and that kind of stuff. And so they have a North Coast Salmon and Steelhead Enhancement Fund, which is a cool organization down here. They kind of work hand in hand with Hatchery Wild Coexist. So, they're great. They really worked a lot with us on getting broodstock stuff in Tillamook, getting, the Wilson River program going, running smoothly, all the associated costs of that, the Nestucker broodstock program going. And so we worked with Jack Smith a lot. Probably anybody who fishes salmon or steelhead in the Northwest should thank Jack for all his hard work and all the amazing stuff he's done over the years. And so we saw that they had this group up there and we wanted one more for the mid coast. And so he helped us start the Siletz River Anglers. We've kind of worked predominantly on the Siletz. We've done a little bit of stuff on the LC, kind of anything that makes fishing better in one area makes fishing better throughout the state. If we can spread, instead of having just the Siletz having a broodstock program, once we got a broodstock program on the Nestucca and got a broodstock program in the Wilson, we kind of branch out, get those going on the Clackamas and the Sandy and the LC and different places, then people spread out. Instead of having everybody go to, there's only one fishery in the whole state that has March, hatchery steelhead. People spread out and we get a lot of people go in different areas and that kind of stuff. So seeing how effective that North Coast Salmon Steelhead Enhancement Fund, organization was, and what the great work they did in Tillamook and all that stuff. We kind of have modeled that, and Jack helped us set up the Siletz Anglers. We have, done a group organization on the Siletz where we're trying to increase our fisheries. We're trying to get more, hatchery, broodstock program fish stuff going on. We've done a bunch of different stuff in our area to do stuff. We have a fundraiser on March 4th of this next winter. We do a fundraiser every winter where we take people fishing on the Siletz. We do get a big banquet hall there in town, and everybody goes out, fishes, comes back, has a big meal afterwards. There's usually auction items and raffle stuff and all those kind of things, and just kind of a fun event, raise some money. And then we do a lot of stuff. We just got done rebuilding the acclimation pond. So on our river, we don't have a hatchery itself on the Siletz. So we got to truck our smolts in from a different river, and then we hold them for a couple of weeks so that they acclimate into our area. So we just rebuilt some of the acclimation ponds, did some work. We were having some leakage and stuff where the smolts were escaping the ponds when they get held in there, and then they were getting dumped out into a field because the water was leaking out in the field, and they'd go, "Hey, we're going downstream," and they'd just get field dying and stuff like that. So we filled some cracks and, work on getting better flow into those, things. And so that's kind of stuff right now our organization's doing. We wrote a petition to the state this year to try to work on a new acclimation pond at the Illahee site. One of the problems we see as fishing guides is right now we release all the fish on the Siletz, all our winter steelhead on the Siletz. We release them at Moonshine Park. And it's a pretty challenging row for a lot of people. So, you have to have pretty good rowing skills and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of times where the flows are low and that kind of stuff. So people will be taking rafts or pontoons up there, but, the drift boats become kind of a challenge up there. And so even if you're up there in high water, it can be really challenging. And so it's not something that's accessible to the average Joe. And so there's a lot of people that fish some of the lower sections of the river, but we can't get the fish to slow down there. So we petitioned the state to build an acclimation pond at the Illahee boat ramp site, which is kind of in the midsection of the river. We figured if we released half the smolts out of there, they would come back into that area. There's no tributaries right there that they can stray into. So we were going to use one of the waterfall tributaries where there's a big waterfall coming into the river right there, thinking that those fish would return to the main stem and be accessible for maybe a month period of time where they could be caught by boats and people of all, irks. It's probably one of the easiest drifts on the entire river. People that are, very low skill, or disabled could access that part of the river, that kind of thing. So we're trying to move some of the fish down into that area, open up some more opportunity for the average person, get those fish to slow down, hold up longer. Our current release site is right at the deadline for how high up you can run a boat. You can run a boat higher, it's just pretty much impossible. I mean, there's one little quarter-mile stretch up higher you can drag a raft or drift boat down, but above that, it's just too big to white water. It's too dangerous. Nobody goes up there. There's no access. So if the fish get half mile above the release site, then they're inaccessible to almost anything other than a little bit of bank fishing. So we're trying to move, spread out, scatter plant a little bit more, try to give the people a little bit more opportunities. We tried to increase about 30,000 smolts. We agreed to pay for them. We agreed to build the sites. We agreed to create some weirs in the upper river around the acclimation ponds that we currently have, try to remove this steelhead that are coming back to alleviate strain and all that stuff. And we put in this submission to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're told by our local biologist that we had his okay and that he'd be supportive of it. And we turned it all in and got turned down by the state. And so
I find that upsetting. I think that's a fair word I can use in public, is upsetting.
It's understated, but yes, I would agree. It's upsetting.
Because, well, now, the gorge, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think there should be a deadline way before the gorge. I don't think people should be up there fishing at those fish. It's, the majority of fish are going to be wild, and those fish, that deadline can be moved down farther. Now, the tribe has a trap right there,
Sure.
just above it. And so But it's by my understanding that none of the hatchery fish are going up beyond what would be, the up past that. There just seems like an easy fix, another fish trap wherever you want it, because those fish, a lot of them get donated to the tribe,
Sure.
instead of getting reran through the treaty of, with the state and the tribe. And so there's a lot of ways to fix that answer because of what they already have in place.
Did they give you a reason, Scott, as to why they didn't let you do that?
We didn't get a reason, but we have a fisheries biologist. Going to say some controversial stuff here, but we have a fisheries biologist that leads our Central Coast district that is pretty anti hatchery fish, not really, heavy fishermen. And we've been kind of battling with this individual for a fair amount of time. And so I would be surprised if there was some, recommendations behind the scenes that we're telling them to not pass this thing. On the Siletz River, it's a fairly large river, one of the larger, rivers in the state, 50 boatable river miles. And we do 50,000 smolts into the Siletz River for our winter steelhead program. The Alsea, which is the next closest river, does 150,000. The Nestucca, the next closest one to the north, does 150,000. The Wilson River does 150,000. And we're doing 50,000, and our proposal would have moved it to 80. So we'd still be doing about half of what these other three rivers are doing. And so it's kind of frustrating to see the 30,000 that we tried to, add isn't something new. They actually had 30,000 extra summer steelhead they used to dump that they removed out. And when they removed those, they said, hey, we're going to, as soon as we give it an opportunity, we'll add those back into the system. So here we're writing a proposal that would just replace the 30,000 summer steelhead they took out. And so it was rather frustrating. We're still working with it, and we'll go through whatever channels, and I'm sure sooner or later we're going to get some stuff done. They're about to do a study in our river where they're going to study the, it's called the PIAS study, where they're going to study, what the stray rates are in different areas and where our stray fish are and that kind of stuff. And so once we get that back, then there's an opportunity to maybe readdress this or do more, or we'll just continue to keep doing it. But in the meantime, we're doing a lot of projects and that kind of stuff, like just trying to make the fish that we have, survive better, do that kind of stuff, get more fish into the area. We have been working with the local tribe in our area. The tribe is going to add about 10,000 smolts of their own into one of the old tribal hatchery. They had a
Rock Creek.
Yeah, lamprey hatchery at Rock Creek. And so they're going to dump, I think anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000. I think they just bumped it up to 10,000 smolts out of that hatchery, which will return a couple extra fish. But then again, like I said, that's also returning up into an area that's pretty much only accessible by the most experienced boatmen. And so, it doesn't hurt my business at all seeing that, but I wouldn't mind seeing it. I want it to be something that everybody has access to, not just the most skilled boatsmen and that kind of stuff. So
Absolutely.
We're trying to do a bunch of stuff like that with the Siletz. It's cool. The outpouring of support, we'd go to all these meetings for years and we'd talk about things we want to do, or we'd talk to them about doing something, and ODF&W would say, hey, we don't have money. And we'd say, there's money. We got all the money you want. Tell us what you want. We'll get you money. So until we actually started doing these fundraisers and raising money, they didn't listen to us. And then now we go, hey, we got money. What can we spend it on? And every year they give us a list of things they want done in the area, that kind of stuff. And, I think the first year we raised $25,000 or something through our thing. They gave us, thing saying, hey, here's $25,000 worth of work we want you to do. And we said, great. So we went and talked to a bunch of people that donate in our areas. And we got all but like 10,000 of that donated. People came in and donated equipment, donated man hours, did all that stuff. So we get it done for a lot cheaper. Todd and I were talking earlier about, the town of Siletz and the mayor, Willie, who's the mayor of Siletz. And he's been awesome. We've been working with him on a couple boat ramp projects around the town of Siletz and doing those kind of things and whatnot. So, we were able to provide some broodstock tanks and that kind of stuff to the people on the Alsea. We've been doing some, talking and work on the Alsea hatchery, which is where our fish are raised and born, which is also where their fish are raised. And taken care of. So it kind of spills over, and it's not just the Siletz we're doing the Siletz Anglers for, but we're actually looking at a couple other fisheries. We're trying to add a spring chinook fishery on the Uquina and trying to add a couple different things like that will just open up fisheries in the different areas and do that kind of stuff. But it's not, what we're doing isn't unique. If you look at this North Coast Salmon Steel Enhancement Fund, they're doing a lot of this stuff up in Tillamook, the Nestock of the Wilson, various stuff. And so we're just trying to make it more, statewide, that kind of stuff, trying to work into a lot of different areas. And like I said, I just want to leave these fisheries better for the future generations than we left them, than we got them, rather than just go out there and make $1 off of the resource every day. We're trying to do a lot of stuff. And so the Siletz Anglers was started by Grant Sheely, Mike Kelly, and myself, just 3 of the local guides down there, good friends. We were talking about it and said, hey, how can we do more? What can we do in our area? So we started this Siletz Anglers group, and first year we put out words. We had maybe 20 or 25 guides volunteer a day to come help and raise money and do this stuff. And so it's really cool. It's neat to see the community surround it, and all the guides and stuff jump right in and do that kind of stuff. And so where the CCA is a big kind of national group that's doing stuff that maybe is something, if we get something bigger where we need sea lions removed out of the Willamette or the Columbia, we can get a hold of them and have them work on doing those kinds of things. Well, the Siletz is something that our anglers more directly, we have an issue with the Siletz, boat ramp's not working or something's wrong, we can go in and repair those things. We can go in and try to get more hatchery smolts. We can go, we have a leak at the acclimation ponds and we're losing thousands of smolts. Let's go fix that and try to get more fish in the river and that kind of thing. So.
No, that's awesome. And I think it is a little bit unique in what you guys have done there. I think you're being a little bit modest. Then the unique thing is it was a group of fishermen and friends that seen where they could help, and you didn't wait. You took charge and you did it. I think that's what's unique about it is, you quit just sitting around talking about it, complaining about the same things over and over and over, and said, you know what, it's coming time to where we got to do something. And so, I can't thank you enough. That is my home river. I love it up there. I don't spend any time on it just because, I'm away. And so, but the fish and dirt, or, the function you have in March there, are all your boats already, are all the boats already spoken for, or how does somebody get a hold of, how do they get on there?
So we have a Siletz Anglers page on Facebook. You can always check that out. Join the Siletz Anglers group on Facebook. You can message me, Grant, or Mike. I promise you, we will find somebody that can take you down the river, that kind of stuff. We have a lot of guides that show up in volunteer days. There's always people that are looking to fill their boats because they are willing to go and do stuff, but they're not always there. We got some groups that just come that are private fishermen that don't hire a guide. They just come and fish themselves for the day and, donate money or come buy auction items or do that kind of stuff. And so we generally like to have anybody that's willing to show up, just show up. It's a fun event, get to hang out, talk to everybody, do that kind of stuff. And
oh, so I don't have to go fishing. I can come to the fundraiser, just the dinner and that afterwards.
Yeah, just show up. We'll make you kind of if you message me, I'll give you details. I'm sure soon, like I said, we're planning March 4th this year. We haven't got it. We're all busy fishing every day right now.
Right.
Guiding all day, coming home, doing stuff, and then trying to, do stuff like this and then get up and guide again tomorrow. So it always keeps us pretty busy, but we're going to get a lot of information out about what our event is, what time people need to show up to fish, make sure everybody that wants to fish can get an opportunity to sign up. But we always welcome, we have some community members that just show up, just hang out, get a rub elbows with everybody. There's no bad experience. We have somebody that's, not big on hatchery fish, whatever. I want them to show up and let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Let's have you come look at what we're doing. Look at all the positive things we're doing. Look at all the people that are willing to just help our fishery and show up for a day. And, I mentioned CCA earlier, and I know that people probably tuned out the second I said CCA because they're frustrated that CCA is fighting, the Columbia River gill netters and that kind of stuff. And it may not be for everybody. It may not fit you, but if you think, hey, the CCA is the wrong choice, that's fine, be that way, but go do something. If you don't think that's the right thing, don't sit there and make one reason why you're not going to do something for our fisheries. Get out there and do something. Whatever that group or organization is here in the Northwest, be a part of something. If you want to be a part of the Northwest Steelheaders or whatever other groups that are out there, Hatchery Wild Coexist is a great group. All these things are things you could go be a part of one of these groups and help them do something. Don't say, I don't like this about that group, so I'm not going to do anything. And I'm going to sit on my keyboard and I'm going to tell people why their organization sucks or does whatever. There's a lot of different groups out there that are doing something. So get involved, do something, be active in anything, whatever that is. There's no right or wrong answers, so.
No, I agree. It's be involved, and I'm late to get involved, same thing as everybody else. I had my priorities in front of me. All this other stuff was just a byproduct of being out there. It was, I don't have time. And that was the best excuse that I could use forever, is I don't have time.
Yeah.
And then one day, you wake up and you're like, I'm done talking about it. I'm done. All my buddies, they all bitch and complain about the same thing over and over every day, and nobody knows where to start. Everybody wants to do something, but everybody's scampering around to where we start. We don't have a broodstock program on the road. That's why everybody goes up and fishes the Umpqua. So you're jammed up there with every guy, and there's a lot of tension that comes from that. The Rogue River guides can't go fish the Umpqua during winter steelhead season, but all the Umpqua guides can come down and fish the wild and scenic Rogue during the time that they're going to be in there. And it's just this big high school drama, popular kids BS. And so when Stephen, when we started this, it was, yeah, absolutely. I want to leave this better than I found. Can it be done? I don't know. But I know if I don't start doing something, then one day I'm going to look back and think, you know what? You did nothing. All you did was go fish, and
I think Scott brought up a good point. Yeah, I think Scott brought up a good point too. It's just starting that conversation. I mean, you may not know exactly how to get involved, but you start talking with somebody that has, in a different area, started a different program, and you start asking those questions. Like, Scott, how did you start the Siletz Anglers Association? And you just start talking with the people that have at least had some sort of success, and then you try and bring that back to your own area, or you get involved with those groups, and then you start bringing it back to your area as well.
Sure. So the Siletz Anglers is a great example. It wasn't something I did, where I just went, man, I need to do something. I went and did this myself. I talked to the North Coast Salmon Steelhead Enhancement Fund for the first year. We, started our thing. We worked underneath their nonprofit before we got all our nonprofit paperwork done and got all of our stuff set up and became, our own, thing and that kind of stuff. And so without their help, we'd never be here doing our own thing, doing that kind of stuff. And so, there's a lot of organizations. People can tune out the CCA because of the gillnet thing in the Columbia, but there's a ton of awesome stuff they have done. And so, the list
absolutely
they've got accomplished with the sea lions or with all kinds of other stuff is incredible. We've got hundreds of amazing people here in the Northwest that do tons of great work through the CCA that are getting stuff done and doing stuff. And for me, I look at it and go, at some point we need to take on, the bigger issues that address our fisheries and that kind of stuff. We need to go after, our salmon in the Northwest here spend, maybe 1/10 of their life in the Northwest. And they go out to the ocean, they spend the other percentage of the times in the ocean in Alaska and Canada, and those fish get fished on all the time. And so, we look at it as our fish, they look at it as their fish, but, it's all regulated up there by the Pacific Salmon Treaty. And the Pacific Salmon Treaty is a big mouthful. It's, it's a treaty that governs all the fisheries that happen in Alaska and Canada in the ocean, all the bycatch of the Chinooks, all of the fisheries that target the Chinooks and that kind of stuff. And those fish all return to Oregon and Washington. And, we started getting some study stuff done on the Siletz where they came in and they wanted to do some creel studies and do some counts where they were going to count all the fish in the Siletz in different areas. And I kind of said, wow, who's paying for all this? And I found out the Pacific Salmon Treaty was paying for all of the work that was being done, and kind of started doing some research and digging into why are they so interested in what's going on in our river. And I realized that what they were looking for is they want to know exactly what our escapement was, because if our escapement was more than they thought it was, they wanted to harvest more of our fish. And started doing some stuff. We put some coated wire tags in for a lot of years. Every hatchery fish that was released in Oregon had a coated wire tag put in its snout. And what we found was in rivers like Tillamook on the Trask River, 90% of the coated wire tags that were recovered every year were recovered in the commercial fisheries in Alaska and Canada. And so we got 10% of the fish returned to Oregon. When you start thinking about that, you know, the fish that got back to the hatchery and stuff like that. And that's an extreme example because the Trask River has some challenges in the way the fish get back into the hatcheries, and they didn't have a lot of creel samples taking snouts in Tillamook and that kind of stuff. So maybe 90% might be high, but if you look at like the Salmon River, you know, it might be low on the other extreme, and they might have 40 or 50% of their fish get harvested up there. And so we know that it's somewhere between, you know, 40 and 90% of our fish that reach adulthood get harvested in Alaska and Canada and don't get a chance to return here. So when they started looking at our fisheries and going, man, maybe we'll take some more fish, we went, whoa, you know. And so what's interesting is you see a year like this year where a lot of our rivers in the Northwest got closed, which is super frustrating. You see, you know, pretty cool dominant fishery in the Northwest being Tillamook Bay, and they're only allowed to keep hatchery fish this year, you know, and the, you know, Siuslaw and some of those rivers got closed completely. And those are indicator streams for this Alaska fisheries. We close our fisheries here, and Alaska says we get to take more fish because they're not fishing down there, and they bump their quotas up 28% this year. So they take 28% more to counteract what we're trying to conserve down here. So we are never going to be able to save our fish by being conservative down here faster than they will harvest them up there. And it's not just our fish up here, down there, that kind of stuff. Everyone is asking Alaska to take less fish. Every stream in Alaska that's an in-river stream, whether it's the Kenai, whether it's the Togiak, the Nishigak, any of those big salmon fisheries up in Alaska, they're all begging Alaska to take less fish, stop the overharvest of the fish up there. So they're asking Alaska to do it. Almost every one of the great Canadian fisheries has been decimated by the overharvest of fish. So even though Canada is in this Pacific Salmon Treaty, they're begging Alaska to take less fish, but all the Alaska stuff's ran by the commercial fishing industry up there. So all of their ODF and like their Alaska Department of Fish and Game, like our Oregon Department of Fish and Game, is being ran by, you know, them up there and that kind of stuff. And so their commercial fishing industry has a lot of power. We don't have a lot of power down here. So we have very little say when we ask them to take less of our fish. And you see their power come wheeling in this year. Like with our Columbia River, we have these incredible returns in the Columbia River, and our fishery is closed. Our fishery this year is closed on the Columbia River, not because we're not having great returns. We had like what, I don't know where the number ended up. I remember at one point it was like 400,000 fish over at Bonneville, and it could be much higher now. Maybe one of you guys knows, but we have all these fish returned to the Columbia, and the Columbia is closed because they're trying to get us to save the Thule salmon that go out there so that way they can continue their harvest in Alaska rather than cut back the number of fish. Like I just told you, they took 28% more fish this year because they want to harvest more. They want to harvest every last one of them. And so what you see is you see them talking about it in the treaty. If you read the treaty, it's renegotiated every 10 years. The treaty actually says stuff like, we understand we've overharvested all of our own Alaska streams. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our fisheries. We're going to fish a little bit farther out in the ocean. We're only going to catch the fish that return to Oregon and Washington. We'll try not to harvest our own fish. So they know that they've overharvested their fish. So they start trying to target our fish more with their, you know, radars or sonars, getting out there, fishing deeper water stuff, doing those kind of things. So they've altered their fisheries. So for 15 years, I went to all these meetings and I would scream at these meetings, like, why aren't we doing something about the Pacific Salmon Treaty, the ODF and W? And I got tired of being a lone single voice. And that's why I started joining groups like CCA and doing Siletz Anglers and doing these kind of things so we can hopefully raise awareness as to what's going on with all of our fish. And it's just frustrating to see our fisheries getting closed while they continue to increase their harvest up there. And, like maybe, 10 or 15 years ago, we closed in the Halem River for 2 different years on Oregon. And a lot of people were like, man, this is awesome. We're going to close in the Halem for 2 years and all these fish are going to get back and they're going to spawn and they're going to do really great things. And the same thing, they just increased their ocean quotas to counteract all that stuff. And 12 years later, we never had a spike after 2 years of closures. We did nothing about it. So it's super frustrating to see what's kind of going on and how our own staff here in the Northwest of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife really caters towards what's going on up there under this Pacific Salmon Treaty. And it's a federal thing. I could talk for 5 hours here about all the crap that happens in the Pacific Salmon Treaty and different stuff they're doing and ways they're, killing our fish and stuff like that.
I think it's super important. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with that there is this Pacific Salmon Treaty to start with. But also, Scott, why does Alaska seem to have more say? Do they have more votes? Is there a board? It seems like everything you've said is Alaska kind of has control over the whole treaty, but
Sure.
those are Oregon and Washington and even Canadian fish coming back.
It is. So it's a good question. So it's a renegotiated contract every 10 years. And so the people that have the power are the people that are spending the money and the people that are buying the politicians and making the rules the way they are. So when I used to go to these meetings, I would talk at all these ODF and W meetings. And one of the people I would talk to a lot was our district biologist in Tillamook. And so I talked to him for a lot of years. He helped us get the broodstock program going in the Wilson and Nestucca. He was a great individual, but there was times where I was arguing against him. And then afterwards, he'd be like, that was awesome. I love all the stuff you brought up and said. And here's some more information about the Pacific Salmon Treaty. Well, on this last go around, he was the Oregon and Washington Northwest representative for the Pacific Salmon Treaty. And so he actually got to that position where he was the head of the Pacific Salmon Treaty and went and sat up there and negotiated our stuff. And he said that he walked in there for Oregon and tried to represent Oregon and Washington as individual single person sitting on the board. And Alaska comes in and they had 10 individuals that came in and they had 5 attorneys that walked in with them. And he just said we had zero say, zero power. Every time we'd start trying to negotiate down and trying to get them to do stuff, they would have a sidebar with all their attorneys and they would come back and say stuff. And he said one of the really cool things that happened on this last go around is the Northwest Treaty tribes got a seat on the Pacific Salmon Treaty. So all the tribes in the Northwest, that everybody's upset is up gillnating on the Columbia and that kind of stuff actually went and got a seat on the Pacific Salmon Treaty. And for the first time, we actually got a lot of concessions from Alaska on some of the stuff. We actually got a reduction in how many fish they're going to catch over a 10-year period. In the past, they could go over their quota with no repercussions. So one year they wanted an extra 150,000 Chinooks in the ocean, and they were told no by the Pacific Salmon Treaty that was going to be too many. And so right as the time they started reaching their quota, all of their boats lost radio communication somehow, and they went 150,000 fish over the quota, and which is what they'd asked for and been turned down. They went 150,000 fish over the quota, and then their radios started working again and they stopped fishing and came in. When they did that, there was zero repercussions for the future years for what happens. And so now in this latest 10-year period, if they go one fish over 1 year, they have to take that off of future years quotas and that kind of stuff. So we are getting some stuff, but a lot of that was, according to my friend that sat on the Pacific Salmon Council and helped write this treaty for the 10-year period, he said the tribes were the only one that really got the Alaska people scared and that kind of stuff. When they would refuse to give in, the tribes would go, well, maybe we just need to shut the fisheries down, or we settle this in a court and we'll just do a lawsuit, shut you guys down. And the tribes have the money and the ability to threaten those kind of things. And then Alaska would say, whoa, let's sit back. We don't want to shut everything down while we resolve this. Maybe we will concede these facts and do that kind of stuff. So we are getting somewhere. We are getting some stuff done, and we do have allies in, the tribes. If we, like it or not, they're a great resource here in the Northwest where they can help us do some of this kind of stuff. And so we did get a lot of concessions made in this latest treaty, and I think we're going to see better stuff over the next few years and how many fish return to the Northwest, but it's, kind of an interesting thing.
I mean,
Well, and I think the disgruntled attitude against the tribes is a lot of, because people don't, if you don't like the hatchery program, come talk to you. Come, go and ask those, go talk to those tribes instead of believing all the water rumors that you hear every day. It's probably a lot different. It's a lot bigger cog in the machine than what you think it is.
Sure.
I'm not saying, I agree with gill nets, and, there are certain circumstances, certain situations, they have their place. But it's not just a blanket thing, those tribes, a lot of them, they depend on that fish as well. And so, for the most part, you're always going to have that one outlier. I'm Indian from Siletz, I've seen it before. You're going to have that one outlier, but pretty much the tribe wants to take care of the resource as well.
Sure.
And we're all fighting on the same team differently. Is how I look at that. I see guys getting mad. There's one water skier on one of the lakes that I fish, and everybody, I can't believe he's out here doing that. And I'm like, man, use the resource how you want to use it and enjoy it respectfully. That's all that I ask. I'll fish other times or elsewhere. There's room for all of us. We just got to have that conversation and not try to shut each other down at every junction. We got to band together.
That's kind of always been my thought and process with like the Columbia River gill netters and the various groups, fly fishermen versus bait fishermen and all this kind of stuff. Everybody's trying to get their piece of the pie, but I explain, if we had 6 pies instead of 1 pie that we're all fighting over, we'd all have a lot of pie. So
yeah, absolutely.
Figure out how can we make it better? How can we get more fish returning? How can we, get a higher survival rate of the fish we do, send out? How can we do all these things? And, we got groups that are very anti-hatchery, and, I've went to some of those groups and said, hey man, let's use your power and let's go after the Pacific Salmon Treaty and let's try to work together in some of these areas. And it's been unfortunate we haven't been able to get, Native Fish Society and some of these people on board with trying to get a voice in the Pacific Salmon Treaty, because that would be something that would make a huge difference here in the Northwest and bring back a lot more native fish and all these kind of things. And, if you're trying to figure out what kind of, problems a hatchery fish has in the stream, the, negative effects that fish has is a lot less than the, 80 or what % fish are being killed in Alaska, and that kind of stuff. And so, we just have a lot of issues with, all that kind of stuff. And those are the numbers of fish that are being caught that are reach adulthood. There's a ton of fish that are being killed in bycatch and different fisheries, the pollock fisheries and stuff up there kill a huge number of Chinooks while they're fishing for a fish that sells for 5 cents a pound, and we're killing a lot of Chinooks to try to harvest a different kind of fish and that kind of stuff. And, they did an interesting thing up in Alaska where the pollock fisheries had to have a counter on every boat, and every boat had a counter on the boat, and that counter did nothing but count the bycatch of how many Chinooks they caught. And a couple of years ago, someone realized that there was a loophole where the fishermen could, if you had a tender boat, which means you buy the fish from the other boats and that kind of stuff, you didn't have to have a counter on your boat. So the Alaska fisheries decided they made every one of their boats a tender boat. So the massive majority of boats in Alaska that were pollock fishermen got tired of the fact that they'd go out there and catch Chinooks while they were pollock fishing, and then all of a sudden their fishery was getting shut down after 2 weeks because they'd reached their quota on 250,000 Chinooks they'd killed. And they found out that they could call all their boats tender boats, and then they didn't have to have an official counter. They got to do their own counts. And so the first year they did that, they didn't reach their quota of 250,000. So instead of having a 2-week season, they got to have, like a 6-week season or however long it was. They had a much longer season and they never reached their quota. And at the end of their year, they had like 100,000 fish left on their quota because they found this loophole that made them not have to count magically when no one was there to count. They didn't catch any salmon. So rather than someone go, that's kind of weird that this happened, Alaska said, man, this is awesome. Great work to you guys for not killing as many Chinooks. We're going to give 10,000, we're going to give the extra 100,000 fish you didn't kill in the pollock nets to the commercial fishermen that are out there, and added it into the Pacific Salmon Treaty portion of how many fish they could catch under different fisheries. So there's a lot of stuff like that that goes. It's just incredible, things. But the Alaska, has a big lobbyist under their commercial fishing industries. They've bought a lot of, politicians. I think 8 different politicians in Alaska have got caught taking illegal bribes from the commercial fishing industry. I think one of the last ones that got caught took over $1 million in legal bribes. But it's readily available if you Google it. I think 8 different politicians have caught legal bribes. And so they set the regulations, they set the rules, they help push this Pacific Salmon Treaty and does this stuff. So when I go to our Department of Fish and Wildlife and I go, hey, why are we closing the Columbia and the Pacific Salmon Treaty is harvesting more fish this year? Why are we closing our rivers here? Then they go, well, that's beyond anything I can do. I don't have any control over the Pacific Salmon Treaty. They tell us what we have to do, and we do what we have to do. So it's hard because you're trying to get these people to be on board and push back against the Pacific Salmon Treaty, and we just can't get any leverage with our own staff. The people that are out there, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife should be a champion for Oregon fish and wildlife. And it's unfortunate that we don't really have a champion for Oregon fish and wildlife. It's right there in their name. You'd want them to be somebody that's out there fighting for our fish and doing this stuff. And unfortunately, they get stuck in a lot of politics themselves and that kind of stuff. And they tend to, cow down to the power like everybody else does. So
there's a lot, I have a lot of family that commercial fishes out of Newport. Sure. They have to have observers on the boat. Well, they're all seasick and stuck in, they said they never even come out of their quarters. They literally, they don't do anything. It's one of those make you feel good. Oh, they got an observer. He or she ain't doing a damn thing on those boats other than sleeping and trying not to be miserable all day and all night. And so, there's a lot of room for improvement. We were laughing the other day, this weekend, how, like you said, everything's backwards. The governor's tag for the bighorn sheep at Hart Mountain this year sold, don't quote me on the numbers, but it's like $385,000. That's what it sold for. Yeah. The last guy that got caught for poaching a bighorn sheep got fined $25,000. I don't know about you, but that's a good return on my money. Yeah. And so, but it's one of those things that's backwards because a lot of people are going to hear this. They're going to be upset. They're going to be frustrated and be like, you know what? Why am I releasing that hatchery fish or that wild fish? Sure. Makes no sense. If I don't kill it, somebody's going to kill it. And so screw it. I might as well have meat in my freezer. That's what a lot of people are, because they're frustrated. Whether they act on it or not is neither here nor there, but that's the way this conversation is going to make them feel. Is I might as well kill everything I want because Alaska is going to kill everything they want. So we're doomed anyway. We got to get things that are more in line. If that bighorn sheep's worth $385,000 at the wild sheep auction in Nevada or Arizona, wherever it is, the fine should be commensurate with that. It should be, that's what that animal is worth.
Yeah.
That guy.
For me, don't take me wrong, but I definitely think there's a place for commercial. There's a lot of comments about gill nets and that kind of stuff. I think that may not be the most, ethical or whatever way to kill a fish or do that kind of stuff. But I'm not saying there's not room for everybody. I would love to see, us work with the different gill net organizations like the tribes and that kind of stuff to work on all this stuff. I just think we have to have some reform in our thing. And it's unfortunate to see Alaska just be so interested in the dollar. There's a lot of the commercial industry up there sells all their seafood to Trident Seafoods or all these other big seafood processors up there that are all owned by commercial operations that are from overseas. Japan owns a huge percentage of those fisheries up there. A lot of our fish get shipped off to Japan. A lot of our salmon eggs throughout the Northwest get shipped off to Japan. And they have an insatiable appetite for seafood and for all that stuff. So they're willing to pay a lot of money. So a lot of money gets filtered in. Those people buy the politicians and make the rules. So, I don't know if there's an easy answer. I don't know if there's whatever, but you got to do something. Whatever
Well,
that is for you, get out there, get a voice, do more, let's get to doing something. And, even if you just sign up for CCA and you're a number and you never do anything other than pay your annual dues, when I go to a meeting and I go, hey, I represent 15,000 CCA members, it has a lot more weight than if I go say, hey, I'm here by myself today, so, there's a lot of stuff like that I think is invaluable. And I do think there's, place for commercial fishing here in the Northwest, boats that are going out of Newport and going out and catching salmon and steelhead and that kind of stuff. I don't think that's a bad thing. What I get super frustrated is watching these commercial fisheries happen. And then we close rivers, Alaska's taken 28% more fish this year, but we don't have enough fish in the Siletz to fish. You could fish in the ocean in Oregon and Washington this summer from February till I think it's the end of November or something like that, and go out and kill 2 Chinooks every day in the ocean. You can fish right outside the deadline on the mouth of the Siletz. You can go out the mouth of the Siletz, and when you get 1 foot outside the jetty tips, you can fish right there and catch 2 Chinooks every day. But we don't have 1 Chinook that we can harvest inside the river. And so that is super aggravating to me. And so we have these rivers that are being closed, and it's not like less people fish. We have a bunch of rivers in the Northwest that got closed this year. Tillamook Bay got left open, but it got left open to only, hatchery fish. So maybe, 10% in some fisheries, maybe 25% in other fisheries are the hatchery fish that they see. So a lot of people aren't fishing those rivers this year. So on the Siletz, we saw double the normal crowd this year. There's a lot of Tillamook Bay guides. There's a lot of Siletz guides. There's a lot of fishermen that would be on these other rivers all coming down to one river, which packs a lot of people into a really small area. When they closed the Columbia, all those people went and fished somewhere. So, why are we closing these other streams? Because there's not enough fish in these streams. And then you're just creating more problems in other areas. You're creating, you're pushing people into a smaller and smaller area. Why we continue to harvest fish in the Pacific Salmon Treaty, they continued to harvest more fish. The ocean fisheries in Oregon were left open and they could harvest 2 every day out in the ocean, but we don't have enough fish in the rivers. So I was kind of like, how are we doing this? And realized that we're setting our seasons based upon different quotas in the Northwest. And so the ocean fisheries in Alaska and Canada are set based upon the forecast for how many fish are going to return. Our own ocean fisheries are set based upon the forecast how many fish are going to return. But some brilliant person at ODF&W, when we made the latest Oregon multi-species plan, which was the regulatory thing from 2014 to 2024, we made a plan for the next 10 years for Oregon for the multi-species plan, said, hey, we should add in spawn counts from the previous year when we're figuring out what our in-river fisheries are going to be. So if you have a river like the Siletz or the Siletz, they would say, we're going to add in spawn counts from the previous year to try to figure out what the next year's fishery is going to be. And there's no reason why the previous year's spawn counts have anything to do with what's returning the next year, because it's ocean conditions. It's what kind of water we had when the smolts got out, how much food was out there, how the smolt survived, how many fish got killed in Alaska, whether or not, all these kind of things. So the spawn counts really didn't have a lot of bearing. So whoever this person was, I have multiple friends that were on the multi-species plan. I was very involved in the multi-species plan. I had no idea this got added. Nobody else had any idea it got added. But what happened is they decided to add it in at 50%. So the previous year's spawn counts weigh 50%, and the forecast for the year weigh 50%. The problem is the forecast already had the spawn counts in weighing 25%. So you have the spawn counts from the previous year make up 62.5% of the forecast for this year. So the Siletz and Tillamook Bay didn't get closed because their forecast wasn't really good. The forecast was really good. That's why you saw the ocean left open this whole year. That's why you saw, the commercial fisheries in Alaska take more fish, because the forecast was really good. So we're closing this river on a year this year that has really strong returns, not because the fishery can't get enough fish to return, but because the spawn counts were poor last year, which we've known the spawn counts have been one of the worst ways to monitor how many fish return to these rivers for 50 years. We never cared because the spawn counts weren't really a factor in what our fisheries were. The problem is right now the spawn counts are getting weighed 62.5%. And a year like last year where we had really high water, the fish spawn higher up in the river system than they normally do because there's a lot of water, so they go up higher. Or if they're spawning in the lower river where they can be counted, the counters can't see the fish very well because there's a lot of water. Our spawn counts in Oregon can only be done on certain days. They're formatic. They only can be done at certain days. They only can be done in certain locations, and they can only be done, by one individual goes, he counts this section, that whatever he sees is what he gets. So we had great returns on a lot of these rivers last year and a lot of spawn, but the spawn counts are done poorly. And so usually the people that are doing the spawn counts are the people that are the lowest in the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Whoever the new summer hire is, that kind of stuff, that's the guy who goes out and counts. Doesn't mean he knows anything about viewing fish. He maybe has never even walked to this section of the river before. So he may not know what a fish looks like, that kind of stuff. They go out there and do the counts and they come back really poor. And so we had a couple of years ago, we had a really low water year, and we called our district biologists and said, hey, how are the spawn counts? And they said, there's no fish return to the Siletz. So me, Mike Kelly, Grant Sheely were fishing one day. We went out there and said, man, there's 1,000 fish spawning in the river right now. We'll take you tomorrow. We'll take you down the river. We're going to show you all these fish. We're going to show you that they're having a huge return, that there are a lot of fish. You guys just didn't count them. And we got told, no, those fish are outside of our view. So those fish, we know that they're there, but we can't count them because they came in not on the day they could count them. They couldn't count that area. They would have altered their formula for how they count every year.
Yep.
So the spawn counts have no bearing on what actually got back and spawned. And now we're weighing at 62.5%. So sorry to ramble there forever. I'll let you talk for a second while I get a drink.
No, I mean that's exactly part of the problem. We had the same talk down here of, how many salmon that have come back this year. And the way that it was explained to me, I do understand the theory in their process, but there's no reason why we can't make it better now.
Sure.
Because you don't have to, there's nothing wrong with having that data.
Sure.
Back here. So in 10 years from now, you have 10 years of that data to where because that's the problem. So if they just uproot everything to count fish different, then they got to change all these other policies because now they're counting them different. Now we have no baseline of where we think we should be. And, but definitely you got to start changing it now. Get out there and count those, like you said, take you up on it, count those fish, have X amount of years of that data, and then start implementing that moving forward. We don't need to keep using these archaic ways of counting these fish. And if I see one more fish counter stomping on salmon eggs to cut the tail off a fish, I'm going to snap. That's the only thing I'm going to say tonight. That's bad. Why we're live.
Yeah, and I mean, they're trying to basically remove as many variables as possible by doing it the same way every single year.
Absolutely.
But they're not accounting for the variables with the natural conditions, like Scott was saying, the higher water, low water, maybe the fish came in on a different day just because of the water conditions. It's cloudy today, so you can't see into the water as far. There's so many, they're trying to remove variables, and yet there's all these natural variables that they can't account for. And then they're telling Scott, hey, you could give us extra data, but we don't want that data, Nope. And so, but they could start getting that data from Scott and all the other guides and start doing that over 10 years. And now, hey, we've also got this baseline for this way of counting things, and then start implementing that. But for whatever reason, I mean, like Todd was saying, they don't want to do that down here. They don't seem to want to do that up there. So this is how we collect data, and this is how we're going to stick to it, rather than let's try and get as many data sources as possible, make that data collection as accurate as possible, and then we can start basing our decisions off of that. So it seems like, I don't know, to me, they're trying to want to keep things the same, and yet they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot with how they're doing that.
Yeah, and so I'm fine with them doing it the same and leaving everything the same and doing that stuff. We've always known they've been the same and that they weren't accurate. That some years they showed up really well, some years they didn't. But if you got a guy out there who hasn't really been on the river, doesn't really know the area, doesn't know how to do spawn counts because it's his first year with ODF and W, and he's thrust in an area to go fish and the water's high and murky and he's not seeing fish, his counts are going to be really low. And I mean, I've had tons of times I've seen staff out there counting and I'll go, hey, what are you guys seeing? And they'll go, we're not seeing any fish. And I remember one day having some guy say that and I went, well, stop right where you're at, look over there. From where he stood, we counted 25 fish. I had another day, I had groups come by and they were sitting in a canoe that they came down the river counting it out of a canoe. And they said they'd seen very few. And I literally pulled over and had them pull up 5 or 6 dead fish that were right around them. They just couldn't see because they were sitting in the bottom of a canoe, not being able to stand. And I'm standing in a boat looking out from a high vantage point and going, okay, there's one right there. There's one right there. So we've always known they've been done poorly, but when they altered, now all of a sudden it's being counted. And it's not being counted slightly, it's being counted like over 50%, 62.5% of the makeup is being made up. So you see rivers getting closed. So you see the Siuslaw getting closed twice it got closed twice in a 3-year period, where 1 year it got closed, the next year it was open to 2 fish a day, 20 a year. And the next year it was closed again. It's not like that river had horrific return, great return, horrific return. It was the spawn counts were done poorly, showed a lot of fish poorly. And so the run was probably more in the middle the whole time. And why are we closing Northwest rivers? That shouldn't be an option. If we're not going to close the oceans in Oregon, we're not going to close the oceans in Washington, we're not going to take any reductions in Alaska, why are we closing our rivers and increasing their fisheries? Why are we having great returns on the Columbia and closing the Columbia? That doesn't make any sense, but have these people in the power are, going to what the Pacific Salmon Treaty stuff does. And then somehow we get added in this rule for we're going to count spawn counts previous years. No one else uses spawn counts. Our own ocean fishery refuses to acknowledge that as a data tool. The Alaska commercial fishing industry refuses to use that as a data tool, and somehow it got put into our system for the multi-species plan to count it as 50%, not realizing it was already on the other side, so it's 62.5%. So how are we using this as a tool to set our own fisheries? So what we're going to have to do is when this next multi-species plan stuff gets done, we're going to have to make sure we have a voice in that multi-species plan and take that idiotic rule out of the thing. So we're no longer using this as a thing. Let them have all the data they want on how they do it the same way every year, but let's get some tools that actually show us what's coming back, what's returning to these rivers. So that way, if we do have poor years, we can do in-season management where we can reduce the fisheries or, maybe reduce our own impact, take less fish, that kind of stuff. On years that it's poor, we don't catch as many fish, so the fishermen don't catch as many fish. So all of a sudden, the guy that came over 2 weekends ago doesn't come back the rest of the season because he didn't see any fish caught. He didn't catch any fish. When you go to the river and everybody's catching fish and it's really good fishing, you get more fishing pressure. And so it kind of regulates itself in a lot of ways. So it's not something that closing a river really makes this huge impact. And if you ask all the biologists and say, look, you're closing the Siuslaw River 2 out of the 3 years, you're killing these businesses that are there. You have RV parks and sporting goods stores and restaurants and hotels that are on that river. You're killing these businesses. Do you honestly think that 10 years from now we'll see any change in what you did? Any biologist would tell you, no, there's no way anything we do right now is going to make a difference 10 years from now if we ignore all the other factors. And it's just one of those things that the only thing that ever tends to get regulated in Oregon is the sports fishermen. That's the only thing that ever gets regulated. You see us get closed down. You see them close the Columbia. You see them close, do all these things, but they don't look at all the other factors. And I grew up as a kid fishing Tillamook, and we had these really cool, strong runs of chum salmon in Tillamook. And there were so many chum salmon that most of the people that fished for Chinooks and for steelhead and all this stuff didn't target the chums. They were almost a nuisance. But there was a lot of people that would come in, they'd fly fish for them, they'd do different stuff. And you used to be able to keep as many of them as you wanted. in Tillamook County. And they were like, you'd go by the creeks and there'd be thousands of them in every little creek and this kind of stuff in the Kilchis. And eventually the chum run started to decline, and ODF&W said, hey, we need to add these to the sports catch. So they made those fish a salmon like all the other salmon. You could only keep 2 a day. You had to regulate how many you could catch, 20 a year, whatever the number was, 40 for your hatch, for whatever your salmon tag. You had to put it on your salmon tag. You could catch 2 per day, and the runs continued to decline. And ODF&W didn't say, what's going on with the chum? They said, we got to regulate sports fishermen more. So pretty soon they gave them a 1 fish a day chum limit in Oregon on these coastal rivers in Tillamook County, and the runs continued to decline. So they said, okay, look, we're going to make it catch and release only. The sports fishermen can only go catch and release only. And this once magnificent return, you could go catch and release them, but you could never keep one. And our runs continued to plummet. And their ODF&W was like, okay, look, it's so bad that you can't even go catch and release anymore. So now you can catch and release from October 15th to November 15th. It's the only time you can even target them. You can't do any retention, and our runs continue to decline. And they were like, what is going on? Why aren't we getting the fish to come back? We've regulated the sports fishermen beyond belief, and our runs continue to decline. And all of a sudden, these chum salmon that we would see in every little creek and every little thing, they were just hardly anywhere. And so we're like, how can you not, you're hardly seeing them in the river. And eventually they said, we've been dredging the bay for 10 years. We went out and removed all the woody debris to try to make sure we had less flooding. We've diked all the rivers so that the rivers aren't spreading out into town and flooding and all this stuff. And they realized they'd taken all the habitat for these young smolts and removed it all. So there was nowhere for these fish to survive and do this stuff. And so they started saying, man, maybe we should look at the habitat. Let's remove some of these culverts that are blocking the upstream migration for spawning. Let's go out and put some of the woody debris back in the bay. Let's build some offshoot channels where the water can flood out, because that's where all these chum salmon are surviving in the winter months. And this is where they're feeding the smolt. And all of a sudden we started doing these other things, and our, chum salmon runs started returning. And now we have really strong chum runs. They might be half of what they used to be, but they're 10 times what they were, 15 years ago. So, we're having these really great things. But we, at some point, started regulating something other than the sports fishermen. We started looking at habitat. We started looking at restoration. We started doing all these other things. We still can only catch and release them from October 15th to November 15th, because once they take stuff away, we never get it back. But that just is a great example of how ODF&W comes and takes all the sports fishing opportunity away until they realize that's not the tool.
No, Scott, you mentioned earlier that the Alaskan commercial fisheries, they harvest anywhere between 50 and 90% of the salmon. We're not quite sure. Do you have any data on how much the in-river sports fisheries impact a run?
So when the fish come back to Oregon, we are allowed, usually the in-fishery sports fisheries are usually allowed between a 10 and 20% harvest. And so in a river like the Siletz, it might be 10 or 15% of the return that comes back. And on a really good year, let's say the conditions all line up and everything, and they end up taking 20 or 25%. And those would be everything lined up. There's a lot of opportunity. The fish held where the people were, that kind of stuff. So you can look at it and say, let's say for a second we take the low side, and ODF&W can tell you it can be as low as 35 to 40% of what Alaska takes. But let's just go with the low side and say 50%. So a river like the Siletz gets 10,000 fish returned to adulthood. And 10,000 fish returned to adulthood, and those 10,000 fish survive all the bycatch, all the pollock fishermen, all the birds, all the seals, everything else, get up to the ocean, they find enough food, they reach adulthood. 50% of those fish get caught in Alaska and Canada's Pacific Salmon Treaty. So that's 5,000 of those 10,000 fish. 5,000 of those fish return to the Siletz and get through Washington's fishery, get through, maybe 200 fish get caught in Washington, Alaska in the ocean that return to the Siletz. So then you're at 4,800. Well, if 20% of those fish get caught by the in-river fishermen on a really good year, you're talking about 20% of 4,800, so 960 fish are being killed by the sports fishermen in the river. So you're looking at 960 versus, 5,000. And that's if you take the highest number of in-river sports fishing and the lowest number of Alaska Pacific Salmon Treaty stuff. So, if you have a year that it's 10% harvest in the river and 90% out in the ocean, it's insane. Like, you do the math on those two things, and it is like, we're killing a couple hundred fish here and they're killing thousands there, So it's one of those things that I don't think they have a lot of data. So a couple of years ago, we took scale samples for the ODF&W. We're like, how can we help you guys get better data? So a bunch of the guides volunteered to take scale samples off every fish they caught in the Siletz. And we turned in, like 300 scale samples at the end of the year so they could look at all the fish, take all the data. Well, their spawn counts found no fish in the river. So they're like, you guys harvested 90% of the fish that returned to the Siletz. We know that that's not true. It's just their spawn counts were done poorly. And, we've had a couple of years now where they look at the, number of fish that are caught on that turn in on electronic tags, and they look at those numbers and they're saying, wow, we can't find any fish in the river that spawned, but you guys harvested 50% of the run or whatever, because that's what we found on our tags and this kind of stuff. And so we've had some issues with stuff like that. And so it was super frustrating that we had all this volunteer stuff done where we took scale samples and did all this stuff, and then they used it against us and said, you guys harvested too many fish. We're going to close the Siletz down. And so we just quit trying to help them and do stuff, because it was super frustrating having this kind of stuff be used against you in hearings where they're like, well, they killed 300 fish in the guide industry out of these rivers and that kind of stuff.
Well, and that's frustrating, because at one point you tell me we can't change how we're counting the reds and the fish that are on them, but we bring in a new, the electronic tagging. They can see, now exactly what we're catching, and you can't use. It seems like, and I don't want to point the finger at ODF&W. It just seems like they're too willing to take data that goes against us harvesting fish in the sport fishery, and absolutely no desire to change the data to get the real numbers.
Sure.
You can't use the new data of the scale samples. That's irrelevant to any, because they've never counted fish like that. And so to me, that's not a viable reason for shutting down a river, just because there's no baseline for it. You guys may have been catching 900 fish a season for your entire life. Sure. Until there's a baseline, that information has no value to me personally.
Well, and anybody that's been out there fishing and seeing thousands of fish on the graph and fish rolling all around you and nobody can catch them, and to think that we're killing 90% of a run on a river that's 50 miles long, like on the Siletz where we have 50 miles of boatable river, and we know how little we're catching, and then you say, hey, look, you're saying there's only 300 fish that have spawned in the Siletz, and I'm telling you right now, I could take you tomorrow and show you 1,000, but you can't go see those. It's super frustrating to have that kind of feedback and those kind of things. So we need to get better at monitoring what's actually returning, trying to figure out how we can do stuff. How can we make our fisheries better? How can we provide more opportunity while continuing to conserve and have strong returns and have future runs? And what I will say is, people are always like, hey, it's okay that we're closing the Columbia because we're conserving, we're helping our long-term fisheries. But what we need active, passionate fishermen that are willing to go out and fight for our fisheries. And when we close rivers like the Siletz in 10 years, if it gets closed 8 out of 10 year period, who's going to be there to fight for it? Who's going to be there to fight for that fishery, to try to not have Alaska killing all of their fish, to try to build better habitat, to build better restoration, to make sure that our fish are surviving and that kind of stuff. We need people that are active in the fisheries, to do that kind of stuff. You see the people that are always champions for, the wild game, elk hunters and that kind of stuff. It's always the groups that are out there hunting that are trying to protect our elk and do that kind of stuff. And so the same thing with fishermen. We need active people to be out there doing stuff.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that the value of, you said that you belong to a number of organizations. Is there to you personally, is there value to that of not just being locked tunnel vision into one organization, but it kind of keeps your horizon more broad to where you're looking at different areas, because there's a lot of fisheries that need, the sea lions on the Columbia, the gill netter, that's all those organizations have a place because they're fighting a different battle at a different level, which you explained earlier.
Sure. I think too many people look at them and go, hey, it's the Northwest Steelheaders against CCA, or it's, whatever other group against this other group. And they're not that way. We're all groups that are doing their own purposes. The Siletz Anglers is never going to do what the CCA is going to do. We're going to do small stream. We don't want the CCA worrying about whether or not we need 2 truckloads of gravel at this boat ramp, or if we need, repair a pond or put a weir in somewhere or do something like that. That's not where their focus should be. Their focus should be on big picture. How can we get some, national stuff done? Like when we need sea lions removed, they can go get their lobbyists to go talk to politicians and do stuff. That's when we need somebody that's big.
Right.
The Northwest Steelheaders are a great group because they're having meetings and talking to people and bringing in fisheries, doing something that's small, river by river, stream by stream. There's a lot of different groups. So I don't think there's a wrong group out there. It's the people that are complacent and doing nothing and not a part of any group. Right. I don't want somebody to go sign up for 30 different groups, but if you did, you're not hurting anything. That's great. You're helping out, you're doing stuff. And, any fisherman probably gets fatigued for all the different groups and all the different politics. You can't keep up on everything. I can't keep up on everything.
No.
But, I try to do as much as I can, do that kind of stuff. And then I try to find stuff like I'm wearing my Cast for Kids shirt. We do an organization that is a group. One of my friends, Jay Ellis, heads up Cast for Kids event. They do, events all over the United States where they take disadvantaged kids fishing and doing that kind of stuff. You spend a weekend. We do one in Newport every year where we take, 50 kids show up with their parents and that kind of stuff. You take them out crabbing and do that kind of stuff. And, this year I had a really cool, I had a mom and a daughter who showed up both in wheelchairs, got out of their vehicle, came over, signed themselves in, rolled their wheelchairs down to the boat, got in the boat and took them crabbing every day. And the event, they send everybody home with crab and do that kind of stuff. And so it's, those kind of things aren't necessarily events that are giving back, but they're getting people active and they're getting people to do something, be out there on the water and do that kind of stuff. So, there's a lot of fun stuff like that you can do.
Did you get a fish Brighton?
I did. Yeah.
And her mom. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's pretty, I got a
fish with her before.
I did. I fished her the first year at Uquina.
Yeah.
And then that year I did all 5 events in Oregon.
Okay.
And so, and then I fished her again when I went up to Hag Lake.
Yeah. I think when I took her this year, the first question she asked me was where Todd was. So now I know what she was talking about.
Yeah.
I was going to be the person this year and stuff like that. Where you were.
No. Yeah. The last couple of years we, with my schedule up there, I got to get my date, the dates have been moving around since COVID. And so, but yeah, it's Jay and what Jay does with the Cast for Kids. It's awesome. That definitely is something that has a special place in my heart. I have the wheelchair accessible Willie boat. And so, you can go from the dock into my boat without ever leaving your chair.
Yeah, that's super cool. I have a little placard of her from, see if I can get
Yep.
and her last year at the event and that kind of stuff. So yeah, so no, it's super cool. Jay does a great event with that thing. It's just fun. It's one of those really rewarding days for me to get to go out there and see these people and get to watch people enjoying it and doing stuff like that. So it's super cool.
Yeah, just getting to see the water from that perspective. It's something I wish I could just fish kids every day. Just see them live a life that everybody else gets to live. Because once you get in the boat, doesn't matter if you're in that wheelchair or one of my chairs. Everybody's everybody's on the same playing field at that point. And so, did she give you the quiz on what's your favorite cartoon? Did she go down that?
Yeah, we talked. Yeah, she had some awesome stories.
Yeah, apparently
I'd heard in my life.
Oh, me too. Apparently, all the movies I thought were Disney are not; they're Pixar, and she will go to blows if you don't know which one you're talking about.
That's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead,
Scott,
Steve.
we've been talking with you now almost an hour and a half. Was there anything else, any other topics that you wanted to bring up or talk about?
I don't know. If you have questions, I'll answer them. If not, I don't know. I tend to ramble. If you haven't noticed that, I tend to get started, and you don't need to prompt or do a whole lot of stuff. That's kind of what I told you when you asked me. I said that I would fill the airspace. So I tend to, be the people that everybody goes, hey, you got to give the mic back up. So
I got a couple more questions on your guys' fundraiser up there. If you don't have a guide, if somebody just emails you or contacts you, you'll find a boat to fit however many guys and gals that we want to bring up and do that.
Sure.
Exactly. Cause I'm sure, like Jake, I bet you, like Jacob, he's already, all you guys pretty much champion for your own boats to where, when I donate, I'm taking two of my best guests, they already know they're paying this and we're going to go fish this derby. And so is there any room as it sits right now?
Show up and bring their own clients mm-hmm. that they know will come spend money and do that kind of stuff. We have a lot of guides that show up and, for a lot of people, it's a great opportunity for them to meet new potential clients. And so we have a lot of guys that show up and we'll fill their boats, and then they get to, show off what they do to somebody new and get an opportunity to maybe, build a lifetime client. And, like my dad guided for 50 years. And at one point, he looked back at one of the original Tillamook rendezvous trips that he did where he had them set up some people, and now it's North Coast Salmon and Steelhead Enhancement Fund. But, at one point we had about maybe 60% of our clients came from two people that fished with him, in one of these rendezvous events when he was, guiding, 50 years ago or whenever they did their first rendezvous. It might've been 40 years ago. He met these people and they came out, and the next thing you know that they were booking with him regularly and doing this kind of stuff. So there's always room for people. If you get a hold of me, we'll find you a guide. If we can't do it, then we'll start, hitting up all the guides we know and saying, hey, we need someone else to come and do this. And, and so we will find people, we'll find a way for you to enjoy the opportunity to come do that kind of stuff. And we're doing it on March 4th this year. If that day doesn't work for you, reach out to us and we'll tell you how to help, or, we'll send you information about some of the other events that are in the area. And, there's other events and different stuff. Tillamook does a big one every year, all that kind of stuff. So, but you can always reach out to me and I will help you find a way to, come do the event, show up. If you're a guide and you're looking for a fun day that you want to go get away and come fish the Siletz and hang out and do different stuff, then hit me up and I'll find people that'll fill your boat.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to come fishing. I don't know. I'm not fishing with Grant. I already give him enough money. That's where I get my insurance. And so I'm not going with Grant. But no, I would love to come up and fish it this year. I don't want to work it just because it's the one river that I will not work in the state. It's just, I keep it to myself, but I would love to come support you guys. And, that doesn't have to be
I'm sure Jacob or someone like that would love to have you in the boat. Anybody would love to have you up there and get somebody that can, handle the stick in the boat. That kind of stuff's always fun.
Oh, I'm a horrible fisherman, and the quicker I can farm one off after he bites and I just set the hook, if he just throws it right then, I'm happy. That's the perfect scenario for me. So, but no, I'll definitely reach out to you. Like I said, you can pretty much put me down for at least one boat. Okay. And then I have a couple buddies down here that would love just to come up and hang out. And, because I don't work it, a lot of my guests ask me every year if I'll fish them on the Siletz, and the answer, year 7 or whatever it is now, is still the same. No, I won't. But they want to come, and so yeah, I'll definitely put the word out. I know you guys didn't have a problem selling your. I think last year you were still looking for guides as well. When it got pretty close.
we're always willing to take as many people that want to come and do that kind of stuff. And, we always are looking for sponsors to donate stuff, that kind of stuff to our event, guides to show up and fish it, and just people to show up. And if you're like, there's a lot of fun being in the front of the boat for a day. So,
Oh, there is,
yeah.
And not to worry, you don't have all the same stresses, it's the watching where, no matter what, if I'm in the front of a drip boat, I'm always looking to make sure, because everybody rows a little bit different.
Sure.
So, but no, it definitely, I'll be reaching out. Like I said, I would like at least one boat for two people.
Sure.
I don't know how hard we're going to fish, just because, Jacob's taking me down it, and so he knows how hard I'm willing to fish. A couple times, that's about it.
Sure.
So
come and have fun, and we're welcome. Everybody's welcome. We'd love to have more people. The more people we have, the more money we raise, the
absolutely
more we can do. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and then definitely I'll reach out to you. We'll get it on the books. Like I said, I got a couple buddies. We'll try to get 3 or 4 boats. So
no, that'd be fun. That'd be awesome. And like I say, for everybody else out there trying to figure out what to do something. Do something to leave this fishery better for everybody. That's the advice I'd give to anyone out there that's watching this. Be active, be passionate, go do something to help our fisheries, whatever that is, So.
Well, we normally like to ask for a piece of alpha to end our episode, Scott. Is that going to be your advice to our viewers tonight?
Sure. I can give fishing advice. I can give, whatever kind of advice you want, that kind of stuff. But, getting more fish back to our rivers means more fish for everybody. Just there's, lots of ways to go out and catch fish and do stuff, but let's get more fish back to our rivers. So I'm definitely an advocate for how can we make everything better. So
I like it. Todd, do you have a piece of advice for our viewers tonight?
Yeah. I listened to my own advice the last 5 days. I took off, turned my phone off, and I allowed myself to be in the moment with my wife. And, I've got such a better attitude. Again, it's that, to be redundant. It is let yourself be in the moment. It is all the other stuff. You got to just disconnect sometimes and let everything be what it is. So, yeah, it's gonna be that one again.
Awesome.
I like it. Mine for tonight, I kind of mentioned a few podcasts back, but you probably like your voters pamphlet and your voters card in the mail, or your ballot. So now's the time to vote. I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, but do your research, look into every candidate. This is how you actually have a say. Our vote has a big say in our fisheries. And if you're not happy with how things are going, now's the time that you can actually affect some change. So have your voice, put your vote in, so get out there and vote.
Cool. All great advice. I like it.
Yeah.
Not big enough.
Yep. And Scott, if somebody was interested in getting a hold of you, either for the Siletz Anglers Association or your eggs, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can Google search Scott Amerman. My contact information will be on there. Our Siletz Anglers page is on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. You can find me on both of those places, platforms, that different kind of thing. AmermanEggs.com. I'm sure you'll have a link in the description somewhere, that kind of thing.
There is one there.
Great way to get eggs, cure, that kind of stuff. But, my information's out there. It's easily Googled, that kind of stuff. You can send me an email, send me a private message on Facebook. You can do anything like that. I will get back to everything eventually. It just, like all my friends that are blowing up my phone the last, couple hours don't realize that I'm doing a podcast or something. And, or they're all heckling me. I'm not sure which one, but, it's long days this time of year. It's got up early, put packages together, got them out in the courier system this morning, went and fished all day, came home, cured up the eggs that I caught today from the fish I caught, put stuff away, ate a little dinner, talked to my wife for a couple of minutes about how her day was, came in here, did a podcast, and then I'll get up and do it all again tomorrow. So if it's not something like this, there's always something to do. There's always some big, retie hooks, redo rods, that kind of stuff. This is my busy time. I'm in the middle of way too many days and that kind of stuff. So, but you can always reach out to me. If I don't reach right back to you, it just means that I'm busy. Don't give up on me. If you need to send me a message twice, don't be afraid to do it. I will get back to you.
What if I just call you like 7 times in a row when I know you're working and on the river, trying to do your job, and then ask why are you mad at me? You call screening me. I don't get it.
Yeah, that'd definitely be fun. The nice thing for me is that my cell phone's almost always muted while I'm in the boat. I'm not one of those guides that's on my phone. So
Nope.
A lot of the areas I fish tend to be areas that have no cell phone. And if it's not one of those areas, the beautiful thing about cell phone is it has airplane mode, and I can check the messages when I'm done for the day. Not like I'm
Absolutely.
fishing Columbia or that kind of thing where I'm chasing a report where somebody's over by the bridge and I got to go fish there. I'm fishing a lot of, kind of small river, kind of a little bit more private stuff, that kind of stuff, try to be away from people. And for me, a big part of that is just having my phone off and that kind of stuff. But
For sure.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. We really
Yes,
appreciate your
Scott.
time. I mean, you're a wealth of information, and we hope the viewers were able to glean a lot of information out of this episode. Hopefully learn a bit more about our fisheries, hopefully learn a bit more about what they can do to be involved in the different groups, whether, do whatever they can just to have that voice, get involved with our fisheries. So yeah, again, thank you very much, and we really appreciate your time.
yeah, no, for sure. Like I said before, you don't have to do what I do. You can do what you want to do. Just do something.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the time. I really appreciate the platform. I hope this continues to grow and go nuts for you guys. And I look forward to coming back sometime.
Awesome. Well, and thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. We really appreciate your time as well. If you'd like more information on what we're doing, it's the northwestfishing.club. You can find us on YouTube. We're now on Spotify so that you can listen to these episodes anywhere, anytime as well. And with that, everyone, thank you very much and have a great night.
Thank you.